Hello and welcome to another Times Rooted question and answer. Now today we're answering comments from our channel members on Frontline episodes and other videos about the war in Ukraine and its impact on the world stage. I'm Philip Ingram. I present Times Rooted Frontline. I've been away for the last week, but I am back. But I also commentate on all matters geopolitical, cyber, defence, security, terrorism and anything else that people ask me to. But we've got some great questions this week, and the first one comes from Pierce, and you say, I've heard about how much the war is costing Ukraine and the EU, numbers like $50 billion to $150 billion. For a measly $10 billion, do you think the EU could use around 24,000 Flamingo missiles to put the electricity out in St. Petersburg and Moscow to end the war? Yeah, that's fascinating. I think large amounts of the EU money is being spent on the production of the Flamingo missiles. And the Germans have been working closely with the Ukrainians to develop Ukraine's domestic missile industry. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's a few German hands and therefore EU hands in the invention and the production of Flamingo. But again, destroying the electricity around St. Petersburg and Moscow would have one effect. I think what Ukraine is doing at the moment by going after the oil infrastructure and therefore impacting Russia's ability to continue to fund the war is going to have an even bigger effect. But there's more than just producing the missiles and forcing the Russians' hand. And again, if 24,000 Flamingo missiles were used to destroy the critical infrastructure around Moscow and elsewhere, it might push Putin slightly over the edge and we might see an excessive response. So it's careful calculations. I trust the Ukrainians' targeting and their understanding of what is having that impact on Putin's decision making, because they will be balancing off the military effect that they're achieving with what their intelligence sources are saying Putin's decision making is looking like. And what is really making him anxious. So, yes, good in theory. In practice, it's a lot more complicated, but great question. Next question comes from Nick Townsend. You say Trump seems to be more occupied in backing winners for peace, order and security. Surely that would mean Trump would double down on support for Ukraine against Russia. Well, Nick, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think Trump thought that Putin was going to win. And therefore, that's why I think Trump was backing Putin. And Putin was reinforcing to Trump that, of course, Putin's going to win. But I think something's changed after Alaska and after the meeting with EU leaders and Keir Starmer from the UK in Washington. And Trump seems to have changed his mind. And therefore, I think he now believes that Zelensky can win. He said that publicly. And therefore, he's backing Zelensky even more. But we're hearing Trump promising or suggesting one thing and then saying he has to go and talk to Moscow about it and another thing, in particular with the supply of Tomahawk cruise missiles. He's going to use the same tactics, I suspect, as he used against Hamas to bring the peace deal in and threaten overwhelming support to whichever side is going to help him get his Nobel Peace Prize next time round. Vladimir Putin seems to be not helping with that at all. And this is where Zelensky could be the winner. But great question. One that we'll be watching closely. Next question comes from Andrew, and you say, do you believe that Robert Fox and other experts actually believe that Russia has collapsed since the Ukraine war started 3 years ago? I don't think I've ever heard Robert and other experts say that Russia has collapsed. I'm of the same belief as Robert and most of the other experts that are there in that Russia has failed in its strategic objectives. We have to remember its strategic objective was to overthrow the Zelensky government, to cause a collapse of the wider Ukrainian government, to put in a puppet government so that Ukraine would become a vassal state, a bit like Belarus, and to stop NATO expansion. Well, NATO's expanded. The Zelensky government hasn't collapsed. the initial Russian military activity failed dramatically. The Ukrainians took back huge swathes of their territory, and now Russia has come up with secondary objectives, which is to try and take and control the whole of the Donbass region, which it, over the last 3 years, has failed to do, even though it's on paper overwhelmingly stronger than Ukraine itself. So Russia hasn't collapsed, but it's not winning and it's not having success. And at the same time, the Ukrainians are showing the Russians that they can't defend themselves as Ukraine systematically starts to destroy Russia's oil and gas production capability, its storage capability, its pumping capability, and therefore undermine its ability to continue to fund the war. This is a long, slow operation, but is one that will have lasting effects against Russia. I'll ask Robert next time I'm seeing him if he thinks Russia has collapsed. I think he'll come out quite clearly and say, no, it hasn't. And how long can Russia survive? I think we've got probably another 12 to 18 months before they will start to really feel the pain. But we'll see. Things could change. Next question comes from Vaser Blitz. And you say, after Trump has secured the hostages back to Israel, do you think peace will be fully restored in Ukraine? I think looking at Donald Trump's 20-point peace plan for Israel and Gaza, there's a lot can go wrong with it. And Donald Trump is going to be focused on that for quite some time. He's had huge successes initially, but he will be turning his attention to Ukraine, and I think he will probably try and use the tactics that he's used against Hamas and Israel to force Russia and Ukraine to the negotiating table. Whether Vladimir Putin will listen to that sort of rhetoric coming out of Donald Trump or not is completely different. I don't think he's going to roll over as easily as Hamas did whenever Donald Trump threatened Hamas with overwhelming US firepower. If Donald Trump threatened that against Russia, Russia could threaten overwhelming firepower against the United States. We're in a very dangerous position at the moment. So we just have to see how this plays out. Of course, Donald Trump's motivation is to get the Nobel Peace Prize. So he doesn't want to start a larger conflict. And he will be playing this very carefully. We will see over the coming weeks and months. But I suspect we're still going to be talking about this war this time next year. And our final question comes from Patrick Chase. You say the US have Tomahawks in their inventory around 4,000. Do you think that will make a difference for Ukraine to take out fairly important hard targets that drones can't? Patrick, the Tomahawk missiles will have two effects. The first effect is a political effect. If Donald Trump gives them to the Ukrainians and allows the Ukrainians to use them as they see fit, it will require there to be US assistance in the targeting. There already is. That's been admitted in the open press in the past few days. But they provide another golf club in a golf bag of different capabilities. And the Tomahawk cruise missiles will have that political effect and send a very clear message to Vladimir Putin of US support for Ukraine. And it'll have the psychological effect against the Russians at that political level that there's increasing US support. And then you've got the military effect, the tactical effect, or where they're likely to be used at the operational level. And the one thing that the Tomahawk cruise missile brings that the other Ukrainian missiles don't have is stealth. The ability to fly very stealthily and very, very accurately to a target. You can decide what window in a building you fly it through. You can decide when you're hitting a double door whether you're going to fly it through the left-hand door or the right-hand door. It is that accurate. And therefore, this will give the Ukrainians the ability to have a military effect using the stealth capability, using smaller numbers than the swarms of flamingos that they'd have to use, which are not stealthy, to destroy key elements of Russia's military capability. That's something that the Ukrainians, I think, are looking forward to using. So, great questions this week. Thank you for posting them. If you want your questions answered, of course, please sign up for Times Radio membership. And you can get us on your favourite podcast channel at the moment by just searching for Times Radio Frontline. Thank you. Goodbye.